Okay, if the members will grab their seats, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the calling of the roll. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways, and Means Appropriations Subcommittee to order on March 27, 2023. Will Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representatives Barrett, Baum, Boyd, Freeman, Hazelwood, Hicks, Kiesling, Lynn, Miller, Sparks, Zachary, Chairman Williams.
Here. Thank you. Do the members have any personal orders before we get started? Seeing none, we're going to go out of session. Today, the purpose, we have the distinct pleasure of having us with us today, Dr. Art Laffer. Dr. Laffer, if you'll come on and grab a seat here, I'll make introductions as you come up. Members, the purpose of the meeting today is to welcome the renowned economist, Dr. Art Laffer, and to discuss philosophies surrounding local property taxes and his experience, not just with his understanding of what's going on in Tennessee, but all across the nation. And the purpose of this is to set a groundwork for a later discussion this summer as it relates to local property taxes. Just to give you a little bit of background, Dr. Laffer is a graduate of Yale University with a BA in economics, and Stanford with an MBA and a PhD in economics. He has had a decorated career that highlights his experience and success in business and public policy. Dr. Laffer held the title of Chief Economist at the Office of Management and Budget from 1970 to 72, and was a consultant to the Secretaries of the Treasury and Secretary of Defense from 72 to 1977. He is most known by many of those in the committee as President Ronald Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board from 81 to 89, and a member of the Executive Committee of the Reagan-Bush Finance Committee in 1984. He has also advised United Kingdom Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher on fiscal policy during the 80s. Dr. Laffer has received many awards and accolades for his achievements and publications, including 2 Graham and Dodd Awards for his Financial Analyst Federation, the Daniel Webster Award for speaking by the International Platform Association, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to the field of economics. Dr. Laffer currently lives in Nashville, where he is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, which is an institutional economic research and consulting firm. And as the members may have experienced, I had the distinct pleasure of visiting with Dr. Laffer about 10 days ago. Went over to meet him and his staff here in Nashville to have a beginning of a discussion around this, and it always turns to more. I expect the same to be today as well. And he is such a servant of the people. He shared chicken leg from Hattie B's with me, and so that I wouldn't get hungry. So I'll always remember that. But Dr. Laffer, thank you for coming today. We look forward to hearing from you and your testimony about the subject matter. And please be patient with us, as we probably will be like the former and late Senator Douglas Henry. We probably want to have a historical account of most of the things you've seen in your life, which may take more than this committee has time for today. So before we get started, I think Chair Lady Lynn, Representative Lynn, you have a comment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, may we have a moment of silence? I've just been made aware there has been a shooting at a school in Nashville, and there are 3 people dead, including the shooter, at least by right now. May we have a moment of silence?
Absolutely.
Amen. Thank you.
Our thoughts and prayers are with those families in that small school here in Nashville. Yes, Dr. Laffer, if you will, go ahead and proceed. I've obviously introduced who you are. We know who you are, but for the purposes of this committee, please introduce yourself, and you may begin when you're ready.
Oh, how do I get the, there it goes. Is it on now?
Yes, sir.
I was out in California and during the period there, I was on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, which is a part-time thing with George Schultz and Milton Friedman and a few others. And, you know, we worked very hard and all this stuff. We had 4 propositions, all 4 lost. The California Teachers Association did it. And Schwarzenegger did 180. He was one of us and then one of them. And so I went up and I told him I was going to leave California because of him. And I was going to, but I'd picked, but you know, when you can't change them, might as well leave if it's the. And so I looked at at all the states, and you know I specialize in states, and I looked at all the 50 states in the United States, and I picked Tennessee as the single best state to move to. Now I'm an economist. Yeah, if you will take a look at it, Tennessee has the lowest tax burden of any state in the nation. I went through all of the metrics of Tennessee, and based upon those, literally chose to come to Tennessee. Best decision I've ever made in my life. I just love it here. All the things I didn't know about turned out to be far better than I imagined. And all the things I did know about were true. So when you look at it, and I just want to remind all of you, because this is a 50-state nation. All of us share the same language. We share the same central government. We share the same currency. We share the same Supreme Court. I mean, their language, all of these things we share. So the 50 states are in major competition one with the other in this. And, you know, in my view, Tennessee is the single best state in the nation to come to. And I really mean that. And I have a little thing in the handout there that you've got is my view of Tennessee. And let me, if I can, just go through it really quickly with you, because it's this prosperity, it's this posterity that I really want to keep here in Tennessee and make sure we don't lose our renowned position in the state. We are the lowest tax state in the nation. As you know, we have no earned income tax. When I came here, we had an unearned income tax, which we got rid of. It was called the hall tax. That was a hard push, believe me. Let me just tell you, it wasn't easy. Susan maybe will tell us how tough it was there, but it wasn't easy. Then we got rid of the death tax. We got rid of the gift tax. Both of those, again, we shared that death tax and gift tax only with the state of Connecticut, where they were the only ones that had that same set. We got rid of those as well. If you look at it, we also put the income tax in the Constitution. We also put right to work in the Constitution. That's in there as well. We also have probably the lowest property tax. Now, this depends on how you measure it, but the lowest property taxes in the nation. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the property tax. And I'm going to come back to this topic with you. But if you look at all these taxes, and we have a part-time legislature, thank goodness, it's really works well that way. If you look at all of these policies that we have in place here in Tennessee, they have consequences, and they really do. In the period I looked at that little thing on Tennessee that you've got there, we had the fastest growth in employment to population of any state in the nation. Number one. Not only that, we have the largest surplus relative to our state size of any state in the nation. Now, think of that. We have the lowest taxes of any state in the nation, and we have the largest surplus. Go figure. How's that possible? All right, what we do. Not only do we have the largest surplus, we're tied for number 1 rating and credit rating by all 3 credit rating agencies. Now we're tied with number 1, AAA, by all 3 rating agencies. All right. Our pension funds, state and local pension funds, are the second best funded pension funds in the nation, according to Pew. We have all of these. I mean, it is just amazing, the state's the growth in income, as I mentioned to you. We also have, if you want to look at public services, we also went, when Lamar Alexander was governor here, we were the 37th best state. That's pretty far down. On highways, today I think we're 15th best in the nation on highways. A major improvement there. The one I want to stress with you that is so critical here is about 50 to 55% of all state and local spending goes to education. That's in every state in the nation. All right, we spend it and every other state does too. The Department of Education, every 3 or 4 or 5 years, does a comparison of all 50 states in the nation. They look at 4th grade and 8th grade, and they look at reading and math skills in 4th grade and 8th grade. You all with me? They do a thorough test of every state in the nation, and they look at them. I'm just going to tell you that Tennessee has the single biggest improvement in 4th grade reading of any state in the nation. The number 1 improvement. Tennessee has the #1 improvement of any state in the nation in 4th grade math. Tennessee is #1 in improvement in 8th grade reading in the nation. #1, every one of these. And #1 in the nation in 8th grade math. I mean, we not only have the lowest taxes, we have the most fiscally sound structure of any, but we have the best provision of public services of any state in the nation. You guys should be really, really proud of what you've done. And, I got to tell you, if I had a hat, I'd take it off to you. I just want to say, my goal and my hope here as an older Tennessean is to make sure we preserve this record of prosperity. Now, I had one fun one that I did. Ron DeSantis is a good friend. I've known him since he was in the House. He's a fellow Yalie. By the way, he was a member of the same secret society that I was a member of. Ooh, I'd have to kill you if I told you, so I won't. But he is. He's just a wonderful guy. But I was knocking him a little bit because, Florida's good and all that. I mean, you hear all these stories about Florida. Florida, we are the only state in the nation that attracts net AGI from Florida. More people with money move to Tennessee than move from Tennessee to Florida. The reason that happens is because of our getting rid of the gift and estate tax, which reversed that process quickly and done. But we are the only state in the nation. And if you look there's a little map on the backside that has all the red states are those that lose net adjusted gross income to Florida. And there's one little green state, a little flat one, looks like a trapezoid. That's Tennessee. We are the only state in the nation that attracts income from Florida. We don't have the beaches of Florida. We don't have Miami and the polylingual and all that stuff. We just got low taxes, and it really makes a difference. And my conversation with you today is hopefully to correct a problem that is not here, but it's a problem that can occur. And it's like my advice to my kids. I have 6 kids. I have 14 grandkids. I tell all of them, please don't start smoking. And the reason I tell them not to start smoking is because smoking can kill you. And if you don't ever start, you don't have to worry about quitting. And quitting is awfully difficult, I know personally. But never starting is the right thing to do. So in the spirit of the advice I give to my children and my grandchildren on smoking, I want to talk to all of you about property taxes. This state has low property taxes today, but it is highly vulnerable, and I mean this very seriously, to cities, counties, and local districts, which are the beneficiaries of property taxes in this state. And looking at this state, I argue that we are the single best state on property taxes. That's looking at the percentage of personal income. I've got the numbers here. We're the 48th lowest. We're the 48th highest, which means we're second from the bottom. If you look at it on a per capita basis, there are lots of ways looking, but we have done a great job on property taxes. And property taxes are one of the most serious taxes to deal with here. And what I'm going to suggest to all of you, and I'm going to take you through my own experience on it, is we should put in an initiative, a piece of legislation that would lock a ceiling in on effective property tax rates in Tennessee. If we did that today, it would have very little impact on any city, county, or local district. Right now, maybe a couple of them would be hit, especially in the Memphis area, they would be hit because they've raised their taxes dramatically in Memphis relative to the rest of the state. And of course, their level of prosperity is much less than the rest of the state because of the property taxes. Now, I'm going to take you through what happened with California. When I was out there, we had something called the Howard Jarvis Paul Gann Initiative, the Jarvis Gann Initiative, which was Prop 13. That was in June of 1978. I was heavily involved, in fact, way over my skis on it. I was way up there. In California, property taxes were about 2.5% of the actual market value of property. Today in Tennessee, we're probably about 0.7, 0.8% of market value. Just to give you a flavor, theirs were 3 times as much. But what happens is when you raise the property tax rate, because now they have taxes you have to pay, the value of the property declines. So it's a double whammy. You raise the rate, but you also lower the base dramatically, and it really does hit. We cut the property tax rate from 2.5% of a property's market value to 1% of that market value on one day. That was one day. We dropped the property tax rate by 60% in one day. You all got the picture. Can you imagine that situation? As you may have surmised, the Democratic Party opposed it. The Republican Party also opposed it. All the state unions opposed it. The Small Business Federation opposed it. The roundtable, the business roundtable of the largest businesses in California, also opposed it. Everyone opposed it except for one small group of people called the voters. And the voters put it in a landslide. And just for the record, not only did they put this in a landslide against all the advice and wisdom of all the major organized groups, but after the election, they turned their guns on those who had opposed it and completely eliminated the political structure in California at that time, just for the record. Now, what happened? I don't know if you know of John Galbraith, Kenneth Galbraith, but he sent me a little toy fire engine. He said, Arthur, this is for you to share with your fellow Californians for all the real fire engines you've destroyed in the state and ruined the whole state and all that. At that time, I was very close with a guy named Jerry Brown, who was our governor. Governor Brown was a big supporter of it privately, not publicly. He put out all the property tax notifications before the election, so everyone saw their property tax were going way up. He did that. He also found some monies in the state budget to get about $4 billion so that in case there was a shortage of money, we could subvene the system to the cities, counties, and local districts so they didn't have to close the libraries, didn't have to fire the police, all close the schools, all of that stuff. Jerry Brown also worked very closely with us to make sure it worked. On election night, I guess Prop 13 was declared the victor. I think we won 65-35. I mean, it was a big victory. That night, I got a call 10 minutes after the polls closed by the governor. And he said, we wanted me up there in the morning. And I said, well, I'd love to come up in the morning. He said, I want to make this work. And I said, I'll have to buy it. I'll get a ticket and I'll see if I can get a ticket first thing in the morning. He says, you got one already. I booked it for you. I said, thank you, sir. Got up there, spent 3 days. We did the process. Within a year and a half, property tax revenues were above where they had been before the tax cut, within a year and a half. Within the next decade, California's growth was the half-assed 50% greater than the growth rate of the rest of the nation. Housing prices, median housing prices, which had been about national average when we passed Prop 13, went to double the national average within 10 years. We increased the population of the state by a San Francisco a year. I mean, we became the magnet for all businesses, everything. It was just incredible. We increased the state's size by a Massachusetts over the full decade. It was one of the greatest periods of success of any property tax initiative. That's what we did in California, but we tried to correct something that was already done. Here in Tennessee, we don't have the overall problem like California had. This is the time to correct a problem that could occur that need not occur. Now, if you look at property taxes, as I mentioned, property taxes are much higher in Memphis area than they are in any other area of the state. Of course, as you know, Memphis is the least developed, the least prosperous portion of the state. I'm going to tell you today, it is because of those property taxes that is true. Property taxes, if we can get those down, we can really change the complete visage of Memphis, of that area of the world, and bring prosperity to them as we have shared in the rest of Tennessee. It's one of the greatest, I think, blessings that we can do with the state. If you look at property taxes, they're very different than other taxes. If you don't like the income tax in your state, which I didn't like in California, you can move. And so I came to Tennessee and I moved. If you don't like the death tax in Tennessee, which up until, 8 years ago or something, we had it, you can move. You move 6 months before you die to Florida. And if you looked at Florida, had much higher average estates than Tennessee and had like 3 times as many per 100,000 population. Everyone just before they died moved to Florida, and you can move. With property, you can't. You can't take your farm to another state. You can't take your factory to another state. You know, you're caught. If you're in a property tax area and you've got property in that area and they raise property taxes, you're caught. and the value of your property drops. What happens is that initially, when they raise the property tax, they start getting a lot more money. Obviously they do, but then no one invests in there. They don't replace depreciation of plant and equipment, and all of this happens. If you look at the city I'd like to focus on with you most of all, and just to show what can happen and how long it takes. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.85 million people. Today, Detroit has a population a little over 600,000. That is a collapse. When I was a kid, my mom and dad would take me, I'm from Ohio, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. My mom and dad would take me on vacation up to Detroit. The train station in Detroit was the Taj Mahal in the 1950s and early 60s. It was amazing. Detroit was the Paris of North America. And then Romney put in the income tax, they put in property tax, they put in everything else in that state and just destroyed it. If you look at the property values in Detroit today, it is a catastrophe. It takes a long time to create a truly prosperous state. It takes a long time, and it takes a long time to destroy it. But don't for a moment believe that it cannot be destroyed. I know of no tax that is more destructive of prosperity than the property tax. The property tax is one of the few wealth taxes we have in a state. Property is wealth, it's not income. If you compare the property tax, let's take a property tax rate of 1% and compare it to an income tax. If you look at the income from property averaged something like 10%. If you rental value is maybe 10% of the value of the property. A 1% property tax is equivalent to a 10% income tax. So when you looked at California, which was 2.5% when I told you about before, that was like a 25% income tax, which by the way, they've now done as well. Just joking. It is one of the most egregiously overused taxes in the nation. Tennessee is one of only 5 states in the nation that does not currently have a property tax limit. I think it's really smart for Tennessee, it would be, to guarantee the prosperity of this state for generations to come, is if we pass legislation to put a reasonable property tax limit, not to deprive cities, counties, and local districts of the funds they desperately need to run their businesses. If we did something on the order of 1% as a flat rate on all property, I think that would be the right way to go. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just be quiet and let you guys ask all the questions. I've done property taxes in many, many other areas. I showed you that chapter in the book, which my book is Taxes Have Consequences, which is a whole history of the personal income tax, U.S. personal income tax. I did it with Brian Dimitrovic and Gene Sinkfield. Brian Dimitrovic sitting behind me right here. It's a long, tall, ugly drink of water. The chapter 7 in that shows what happened to property taxes during the Great Depression. When everyone was searching for revenue, all the governments they raised and just caused riots. And it was just, we called it the unindicted co-conspirators of the Great Depression. And it's just, we can solve this problem today. Let me just please throw it open.
And thank you, Dr. Laffler. I'm sure we do have plenty of questions. If the members do have questions, just let Dakota know. I did want to ask real quick, just as it related to your initial thoughts about capping property taxes. Would your suggestion be that the cap on property taxes would be limited only to residential properties, or do you feel like it should be commercial properties and farmland or those kinds of things?
It should be all property.
Okay.
What you want to do is you want to make sure you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income or taxes. And when you have different categories of differently taxed items, you just incentivize people to try to shift and parlay their things and go into tax planning, tax avoidance. They do that. All property should be taxed at the same rate. And what you should do is many entities tap into that property tax. I believe it should be done. We did not do it this way in California, but I believe it should be done here. The property taxes should be collected by the county and then distributed in some sort of way to the cities, counties, and local districts and all that stuff. There are a lot of entities that live off the property tax, and I don't think it should be the state that determines how the allocation goes, but it should be to determine what the total amount should be. Make sense? I mean,
Yeah, that does make sense. Just so what your argument would be is that the way that we're doing property tax today in Tennessee is not necessarily the problem. Obviously, the data doesn't prove that it is if we're 48th out of 50. Your concern would be that if we had what we might be on the cusp now or what we experienced in the late 70s and early 80s were to occur. Tell us what happens when that happens as it relates to local revenues through property tax as it relates to other revenues that the state may collect.
yeah. Let me just say what triggered my fear here in the state of Tennessee was the Nashville-Davidson County when they were looking at the transportation bill. And that bill would have raised property taxes dramatically. As you know, they just raised them as it was 35% a raise. Now they're still within the limits. But if that had happened, my analysis is that that would have sunk the whole state. You'd have had everyone leaving, all that, no one to do business in Davidson. They'd be all doing it in the neighboring. No one to then, they'd have to raise the property taxes to pay for the bills. And it would be a death spiral of incredible, destroying this wonderful city of ours where you have your capital. It would be the tragic sin of all sins, in my view. This is the center, the homeland of the great state of Tennessee, and anything we did there. Now, in California, when we did it, as I mentioned, we got back to full revenues within a year and a half. What we had is the greatest growth of all. Now, when new property comes in, that new property pays taxes. And so the revenues came in not only because of the growth, but also remember that when I said it was 2.5% of market value, that was the property tax that was going into effect with the new assessments. So those new assessments didn't actually take place. So the huge run of the property values really created the revenue surge in California. So we made up all lost revenues within a year and a half. And then we had the economic growth in the state. What we did, and what I think is the right thing to do, is to set a limit as to how much property tax revenues can increase from any single property. For example, if you live in your home and you're paying $1,000 in property taxes, you should set a limit as to how much those taxes can increase each and every year, as long as you stay in the house or as long as you have your same business. But once you sell, you get a new basis. And that's when you go with there. So there's an automatic upgrading of the basis every time there's a transaction done. That's how California did it. It seems to work pretty well. There are some serious inequities involved in that people perceive as inequities, but they're really not. There's no tax system that's perfect and fair all the way across the board to everyone. And I think it works well. I think that's what we should do here. I think also what we should do here is, especially, I'm going to mention Memphis, not because I'm not picking on Memphis. Memphis will have the biggest problem. And so therefore, what I think we should do with some of the surplus monies is fund them for a year or two or three or four, maybe subvene funds from the state to those cities, counties, and local districts to allow them to adjust without a major cutback in public services. And I think we could do that very easily, very quickly, with very little cost in this state.
As the members know, the legislature has in the past distributed monies to local counties and cities as well. Representative Lynn, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Laffer, thank you very much for being here. It is wonderful to see you again.
Well, you're my hero, as you probably know.
You're very kind. And your ponytail palms, they're good. Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
I have a couple myself. I wanted to ask you, I'm looking at this map here. I have a friend who moved to one of the top 10 highest property tax states in the last 3 years, and they are already packing their bags to move to one of the lowest property tax states, which is great. They're looking to moving to Arkansas. But at ALEC, we've looked at states and how they spend. And one of the triggers that it seems like, we've talked about at ALEC is unfunded pension liabilities and pensions. So at that local level, they're literally raising the taxes, the property taxes, so they can fund their pension obligations that are not currently funded. So this year's property taxes are going to pay for this year's pension payments, by and large, for the unfunded liability. And do you have thoughts on that additionally, on how do we, or are there any ideas on, keeping your local government from uh, going awry like that? Because it seems like it's real easy for a politician to sit there and go, oh, well, we'll raise your pension. We'll raise your pension. Oh, we'll raise your pension. And before long, they are in such hot water.
Yeah.
They are spending so much money on these unfunded pension liabilities, and the property taxes just keep going up. And people can't afford to live.
Yeah.
You get older, I'm getting older, and I want to stay in my home. But, it does worry me that what if Tennessee went awry like that too? So do you have any, can you educate us on that too?
A
'Cause
little
that
bit,
seems to be a
if I can.
terrible
And
problem.
I mean, the big supporters of the property tax limitation are people who have lost their income, they retire or whatever. They want to live in their homes, and they can't stand the doubling of property taxes every other year. They just can't handle it, and they get pushed out of their homes. It's just really unfair. There are other groups that have the same thing happen. But in Tennessee, number one, our pension funds are as close to fully funded as any state in the nation. I mean, and that was, I can't remember the House member's name that I used to work with. He was head of your budget. What was his name that I did the ads for? He passed away about 2 or 3 years. Charles Sargent. I did ads for him. We had a big fight the first time we met. And I was older than he was, even though he thought I was younger. So I said, I'm older than you. I'm your senior. And he said, I've been doing the budget here in Tennessee for years. And I said, I was the chief economist at the U.S. budget. Do you want to match me on So, but then we became close friends. He ran the best state budget ever. I mean, I'm just such a huge fan of what he did for this state. And we don't have that problem, Susan. We really don't. And in Tennessee, my whole wish is that we don't have it. But let me just say this about cities, counties, and local districts. There's a reason why we have separation of powers. There's a reason why we have 50 states, not just one. And that's to allow people to experiment. It becomes a cauldron of competition. And I feel very sorry for the other 49 states because Tennessee won. But we have cities, counties, and local districts here that would like to provide different services, different things. And they may well want to spend differently than other ones. Some of them want to put a bridge in. Some of them want to put a school in. Some of them maybe even want lower property taxes than 1% of market value. So that's what you really want to encourage. But you must limit them so they can't take the whole ship down with them. And that's the one thing I'm terrified here. We do not have a property tax limitation in the state of Tennessee. We're one of 5 states that does not. And that is a very dangerous situation to be in. But I would not mess with city, counties, and local districts as to how they want to run their places, but just make sure they can't pull the state down with them. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Dr. Laffert. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you. And I share your admiration for Charles Sargent. He was a great mentor and a great friend. And it's been my honor to follow he and Chairman Lynn in the role as Chair of Finance. So we appreciate your kind words. And I know his wife, Nancy, will too. Just questions in some sort of different directions. But first of all, you mentioned the ceiling. I think 1% is what you would recommend. Looking at the chart, there are a number, most of Tennessee counties and cities are below that. So would you have any recommendation? I can see if we put the ceiling at 1%, then there might be cities and counties that would see that as, oh, this is a great windfall, then we'll do that right away. But would you have recommendations about a more of a progressive kind of raise, or limiting, cities and counties to X amount of increases annually or something?
Yeah, there's always going to be problems putting one limit on everyone, across the board. Obviously, some places may have different needs than other places. And if you were all wise and the spirit from above and could tell everything, you might want to set different limits in different places. I think that's a very major mistake. You want one across the board limit there. When I was talking to, what's his name? The mayor of Knoxville. Mayor Jacobs, Kane, as wrestling, he was talking about how the property taxes, he doesn't have a chance to raise them, and things happen. And there are lots of areas that have to be solved in the local areas on how to allocate these funds. I would leave that up to them, is what I would do if I were in the state legislature, and let these people experiment. Some of them may want to not go up to the limit and compete with other districts, counties, whatever it is. Some may. So that's the way I would go about it. And I wouldn't like to second guess those areas as to what they think is best for them, for their people.
And you mentioned that Tennessee is only one of 5 states that does not have a maximum ceiling on property taxes. Can you tell us what the others are?
No, I could, but I can't today. I'm old. I drool. I forget. I mean, there are 45 other states, and which ones have which and which. But I can tell you, California has 1%.
Okay.
And by the way, I mean, California is probably about 35th highest, something like that, 33rd highest. It's in there. So there are a lot of states that are lower than California. I mean, but California, that has been the saving grace for California. You wonder how California can survive with what it does, what you hear. It's because of Prop 13 that it survives. If it did not have Prop 13, California would be called West Virginia.
If at some point, I guess we could do our own research, but I'd just be interested in knowing what those states are. And one of the
I can
things
get all that for you, by the way. I can get you a list. In fact, do we have that? Can we just send them, Nick? Which states and their effective property tax rates are, and where Tennessee? I'll do it about 3 or 4 different
I was
ways.
just interested in what other states do not have a limit or a
Which
ceiling.
ones? Well, we can get those from that one study, Nick, if we can. Okay?
This
We'll
is
get
just,
that right to you.
thank you, Dr. Laffer.
Shall
This
we
is
do it through you, Mr. Chairman?
you can do that to Chair Lady Hazelwood. I'll make sure she gets the information and
Great.
the other members of the committee. I will say to the members, if you ever get a chance to meet Dr. Laffer in his office, this is kind of how it happens. He sits there and he yells for Nick or someone and says, "Get me that." And I have a plethora of documents from 7 other states where in the 2 hours that we were there, he yelled down the hall to have him print something. So I'm sure Nick and his team can get that stuff to us.
I've got the best staff in the world. They've got the worst boss in the world, but I've got the best staff.
They're not nodding, sir. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
And one final question. You mentioned that once the Prop 13 went into effect in California, then property prices for property more than doubled in a very short time frame. One of the things that we struggle with in the state, particularly here in our capital city, but it's a problem in my city of Chattanooga. It's a problem in other places as well, and it's a growing problem. That's affordable housing. So how do you, balance, it's great that property values are higher. That means we get more taxes, but it's not great for if you're a young family trying to buy your first home, or if you're a senior trying to stay in your home. So give me your thoughts on how we balance that.
It's wonderful for the senior, by the way. The senior's a lot richer. So the higher property values are for a senior who owns a home, that senior is very happy with that.
Only if they live or choose to move. So
they can do. Tom Selleck, my lookalike, does those reverse mortgages. You can do a reverse mortgage and do very. It's a new home buyer that's the problem, and there is nothing more reflective of and I'm going to be really straight with you here, if I may be very straight. There's nothing more indicative of prosperity than high property values. If people don't like your place, they leave, and you get the hollows of Kentucky, where you can buy a home in Kentucky up a hill in a hollow there for $30,000 with a lawn and single wide there. I mean, because no one wants to live in Kentucky in those places, and so the pure sign of prosperity is that housing prices go up. I would be very loath to ever try to lower housing prices. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure there's no restrictions on the building of new properties to keep them from not being artificially raised. But when you have everyone in the world wanting to move into Tennessee, you're going to have property values rise. It's a sign of the wealth of Tennessee is increasing dramatically. I just had this discussion not a month ago with the governor of Colorado, who was my intern, Jared Polis. And he was talking about, I was in the like a group with you, and talking about property values in Colorado and especially in Denver. They're all worried about property values being unaffordable. That's a great sign. Now, what you want to do is you want to be able to figure out ways of helping people get ownership of those homes, but not destroy the value of homes. You want to make sure you recognize that homes and home prices are a sign of prosperity. The only way you can really get home prices low is ruin your place. Detroit, inner city Detroit homes are really cheap. You want to move there? No. They're really high in Tennessee and in Nashville because people do want to move here. So be careful not to try to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, please. Get rid of all the restrictions on building homes, get rid of all the artificial impediments and all that. But please just make sure you realize that this is how it really works. And there's nothing, I mean, how many people know the value of their own home? When you see your value of your home going up, are you happy or sad? I rest my case.
Thank you. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Again, not to belabor or beat a dead horse, as we say in the South, but we do have issues. You have, and I know in California it's an issue in many places. You have service personnel, you have teachers, you have police, you have those kind of folks who aren't able to afford to live in the area, where they work. So I just think I would ask this committee and all of us in the legislature to think about the whole picture when we're talking about these kinds of issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Zach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Laffer, so good to have you here.
Thank
Thank you for your investment in Tennessee as soon as you moved here. I've heard you talk about in the past your engagement with Governor Haslam and the work that you've done immediately when you came here. And I've also, serving under Governor Haslam, I heard him say numerous times that the federal government had become an unreliable partner with states like Tennessee. And I think we could probably say even under Governor Lee, it's become more of an adversarial relationship, unfortunately. So my question is kind of based on an interview I heard, I think it was last week where I heard you on Glenn Beck and you were comparing the early 80s. We were talking about high inflation, interest rates. I think you even made a comment about the 4 previous presidents that led up to the 80s and the challenges under those administrations, and comparing it to where we are now, really the primary difference being the $30+ trillion debt, which we didn't have at that time. So from a state's perspective, because obviously this is not Congress, this is the Tennessee legislature, in addition to what we've talked about here this morning, what are some steps or what are some things that you see within Tennessee? Okay, we may be the best in the country, but things that we need to be doing or aware of, whether it's central bank digital currency, whatever it is, that we need to continue to take to firewall ourselves from what some would perceive as an adversarial relationship with the federal government. What is kind of a snapshot and a picture that you see of that?
I'm sorry to say that you are correct. And it shouldn't be an adversarial one. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It really should not be. It has evolved into being an issue of that ilk. And, the only thing I can do is just keep on the straight and narrow in Tennessee, just keep plugging away. There is nothing more important to any state. And when I've looked, I don't know if any of you saw my book, The Wealth of States, in 2014, which was a 30,000 view of all states. The one thing that affects a state most of all is the country, period. The second most important thing is the state itself, what it does. And the third most important thing is what your neighboring states do. In other words, if you cut taxes, you'll be better than the other states. You'll grow faster and all that. But if there's a depression going on in the country, believe me, it'll hit you. Now, I can tell you this, in the 2008-2009 decline that occurred in Tennessee property values leveled off, came down a little bit, but nothing like the other states. In other words, because we ran the state so well compared to other states that we suffered the deep recession of 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, much less than the other states did. I mean, our banks survived through it. And I mean, there was the big collapse and you remember all that stuff. Tennessee did. All I'd suggest you do to insulate and inure yourselves against the problems of the federal government is to make sure you run your ship really carefully, really well, and fiscally soundly. And Charles Sargent, I think, was the master of that. And I just say you keep on that straight and narrow. And that's all I'm trying to advise you to do today is just keep on it. When the dust settles and the smoke clears, we'll be in the best shape of all the states. And we really will be.
One more, Mr. Chair, if I may. And then quickly, could you just give us your thoughts or touch on what is perceived now as the banking crisis, starting with SVP? And can you just kind of give us a snapshot, your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, well, this is, and I don't mean to become political in this, but it really does bother me enormously. There has been a mood in this country since 2008 where the central bank has thought zero interest rates was wonderful. And so they get an environment there where they bought bonds, all the long-term government bonds, and they bid their prices up, interest rates down to effectively zero. Now all the banks have been operating for now, what, 15 years with zero interest rates. Now, if you're a bank and the investment environment is a zero interest rate environment, how do you make money? You need to put longer and longer maturity securities into your portfolio to get any type of yield, any type of income into your thing. So you've got long-term, mostly government maturity banks, all right? And you've got short-term liabilities, which are the depositors that are being paid nothing. So you have a zero payment to depositors and a slight yield on long-term assets. That's the only way you really can succeed in this world as a bank. And then when they pop interest rates up, what happens? Well, when they pop interest rates up, all of a sudden, your long-term bonds fall in value. So you have an unrealized huge capital loss. What you find happening is your liabilities, your bank liabilities are now costing you a lot. You've flipped over, you flipped upside down, and you're in deep trouble. Now, the banks that have this situation, most of all, are the fastest growing banks and the fastest growing banks that have been very aggressive in trying to get yields and get their asset value, to get market cap up. And that, of course, is classic Silicon Valley Bank, classic Signature Bank, UBS, Deutsche Bank. There are a bunch of others that have all been hit. I'm going to say to you today, this problem is not solved. In order to alleviate the problem, the Fed with Powell and all the other ones there, and believe me when I tell you there is not a Paul Volcker on that Fed, there's not an Alan Greenspan, there's not a McChesney Martin, there's not a real gravitas central banker on there, and they don't know how to handle this problem. And so what they did was they stepped in and they were running assets off their balance sheet. They were up to almost 9 trillion, and then they started running it down. I think they got down to 8.6 trillion, and now they've pumped it right back up to 9 trillion with the bailouts of all the banks. We are in for a long haul here. The way I like to describe it, and it's if you have a boiler in a boiler room, and you go into that boiler room and you turn the heat up full speed, full spot, all the way up, and you turn off all the safety valves on that boiler. Okay, you got the heat on full blast, and you've turned off all the safety valves, and you take a little brass tap hammer, and every 15 minutes you walk into that boiler room and you go on the side of the boiler. By turning the heat on full blast and turning off the safety valves, you've guaranteed that that boiler will explode. By going in every 15 minutes with a little brass tap hammer and going, you've guaranteed to be there when it happens. And Silicon Valley Bank and Signature and these other ones, Zions and all the other ones there are really just the tapping of the hammer. We have a system that has been put under enormous pressure because of bad fiscal policy, borrowing lots of money to pay people not to work. That's just not a smart model. And printing all the money they possibly can through the Fed and owning all that balance sheet. That's not a smart model. And you put all that pressure on the economy. And believe me when I tell you, it's now starting to show signs of cracking at the edges. And you can see it, by the way, all the way rolled around. In Israel, you can see it in Germany, the riots there. You can see them in France trying to get their pension. I mean, it's a classic global phenomenon. But we're just beginning this process, my view of the world. And the only way I know of solving it is to follow markets, not lead markets. The central bank should not set interest rates. They should follow interest rates just the way Paul Volcker did. But no, they believe in price control, setting interest rates. And if you try to go against the market, sooner or later, you're going to explode. And that's what they did. And I could go into it a lot more detail if you want. But, they're arguing about moral hazard. They're arguing about inspectors and all that stuff. We should guarantee all depositors, my view of the world, for depositing in a bank. You should not be treated like an investor or a bondholder in a bank. If the bank goes under and you're an investor or bondholder, you should lose everything you got. But if you're a depositor, you shouldn't. You don't want to turn a liquidity crisis into a solvency crisis. Back in the 19th century, Walter Bagehot put it very, very cleverly. He said, in times of crisis, discount freely, but don't discount during non-crises. And that's exactly what the central bank has done. And we have to live with this problem, and it's going to be a very hard time returning us to normal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up to Chairman Zachary, and I've got one other on the list. How is keeping depositors whole not bailing out the bank?
Well, when you're a depositor, you're a depositor. You expect that, you're not investing in the bank or anything like that. You're just holding your deposits at the bank. And you need to know that those deposits are secure. Now, we felt it was wise enough long ago and far away to make it up to 250,000. We were right then. And we should make it universal, because they're not people who need to know the financials of each and every bank and which bank should you hold your deposit in. Oh, God. You don't need to be an expert on the finances of a bank to do that. That should be the federal government, and what they should do to make sure that you just aren't bailing out the bank. This is what they call the moral hazard problem, because banks obviously seeking return, if the losses to the depositors are guaranteed by the federal government, that changes the calculation of how much risk you're going to take. That's where you need bank regulators, bank supervisories, and all of that. Now, in the Silicon Valley Bank, and none of these, I think, were determining, but the president of the Silicon Valley Bank, as you know, is on the board of the Federal Reserve of San Francisco. Now, not that made any difference. The supervisors that came down to Silicon Valley Bank, as we all know, the records were clear. Any one of us going through that record very carefully could have seen the problems. I know how they set up regulations of banks, and they have a checklist. You go down. What are all the assets of the banks? 84 categories. How mature? What are the yields? Blah, 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 all that stuff. And every one of those categories is listed as to its risk, its return, all that stuff. And that is universal across all 12 Federal Reserve districts. I mean, I can't imagine that the regulators and the supervisors of Silicon Valley Bank did not know exactly what every asset was, what its yield was, and what the risk profile of the bank was. I don't know how that record did not get to the president of the San Francisco Fed, but obviously somewhere between here and there was a slip. I don't think there was any malevolence whatsoever in any of this stuff, but it just means we need to be very, very careful on supervising banks to make sure that their portfolios, given that we guarantee the depositors, that these people are not taking undue risk. I think that's how we cover the moral hazard, rather than trying to make, if you know a bank cannot guarantee your deposits, are you going to keep your money in that bank? That's called a run. Do you want to, let's say you're General Motors, and how many deposits do you think they have over 10 million, 20 million, whatever it is? You expect every one of those banks they do business with, they should know the financials of that bank and the risk of drug. No, you can't allow runs to occur. You just can't. Now, that's different than the bondholders. That's different than the shareholders. They should, once you guarantee those deposits, those banks should no longer have any bondholders or shareholders. They should lose it. But the depositors should not be required to know the financials of the banks. I don't think. That's me.
Thank you. Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Laffer, it's great to see you today. I have two questions. One of them is kind of in line with sort of a national issue, and then I do have just kind of a small local government question. So I'll start with the big one. With our national debt swelling to the size that it is right now, and we've been able to service the interest on it for the last few years because the interest rate has been so low. But with the ballooning national debt and the rising interest rate, looks like we're heading for a train wreck. And I'm just curious, what do you think is going to happen, and what's the solution?
I would not describe it in terms of the national debt, okay? Debt is neither good nor bad. It's not. Debt depends upon the spread between lending rates and borrowing rates. Let me imagine that I will lend you all the money you want at 2% and borrow all the money you want risk-free at 10%. How much should you borrow? as much you can get your hands on. Now reverse those numbers. I'll lend to you at 10% and let you invest at 2%. How much? Zero. So it's the spread that matters, that really does matter. The problem with our national debt today is the spread. And let me just put it this way. What we have done is we've used all of that borrowing to pay people not to work and to tax them if they do work. Now, I want to, can I go through this slowly with them if I can, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
It'll just take me a few minutes. It's called the transfer problem. And it's a very simple one. And it's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's not liberal. It's not conservative. It's not left wing. It's not right wing. A transfer occurs when you take from someone who has a little bit more and you give to someone who has a little bit less. You with me? That's a transfer. And it can be any characteristic, but I always use it a little bit more to. Now, when you take from someone who has a little bit more, you reduce that person's incentives to produce. And that person will produce a little bit less. Any questions? This is just math. Now, when you take that money from someone who has a little bit more and you give it to someone who has a little bit less, you provide that person with an alternative source of income other than working. And that person, too, will produce a little bit less. You follow me? The theorem here, and it's math, I hope I'm explaining it to you verbally okay, but it's just math. Whenever you transfer income, you always reduce total income. You're a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, a conservative, lefty, righty. Whenever you do a transfer, you always reduce total income. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But what you should do is be clear-eyed with a warm heart. You should understand what the consequences are, and it's math. When you transfer income, you always reduce total income. All of you with me? Okay? Now, the lemma from this theorem is also very important. Really, in fact, I find it very tasty. I'm not going to prove it to you, but I think it's fairly obvious. The more you redistribute, the greater will be the fall in total income. All of you with me? Okay, I'm not going to prove that one. The limit function of this theorem is really, I think, piquant flavor. Wonderful, because I wish Bernie Sanders were here today, and I wish Elizabeth Warren and AOC and the others, and lots of other people, Republicans too, by the way. It's not just Republicans or Democrats. If you were able to redistribute all income so that everyone comes out exactly the same, if you were able to do that, okay, there would be no income whatsoever. Now, let me prove it to you verbally. Again, I can do it in math. It's much easier. But let me do it. In order to get everyone to come out exactly the same, what do you have to do? What you have to do is tax everyone who earns above the average income 100% of the excess. You with me? And you have to subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. Only in this way can you guarantee that everyone will come out exactly equal. Okay? Now, if you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% above the excess, all right, and actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate today, Counselor, we'll all be equal at zero. This is math. I don't know where my colleagues come in on this. I don't understand them. They don't understand basic economics. This is redistribution, and it's perfect. If we were able to redistribute all income so everyone who worked and produced received nothing, and all those who didn't work and didn't produce received everything, what do you think would happen to total income? I mean, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you? Come on, help me on that. You follow me? That is math. And I don't care who you are, you cannot get away with that. That's where I would be focused on much more than I would the deficit or the national debt. We could correct all of these problems really quickly if they understood the actual consequences of what public policy does in the system. And you know, a warm heart is a cold heart if you aren't clear-eyed. If you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing to people by pretending you love them, you know, you're really doing the worst damage of all, me speaking.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the next question is just it's back to local government. It may have been my freshman year in the General Assembly. One of my local governments asked me to bring a local act to allow them to change their hotel motel tax rate. And so I carried that, and I was surprised at the amount of opposition that I ran into, and that the state so highly regulated what those monies could be spent on. And so in your opinion, I think right now, in order to have a hotel motel tax, it has to be used exclusively. I could be off on this, but I think it has to be used for revenue or economic development. In your opinion, should we just let the local governments do what they want there, or should that money be used specifically for those purposes?
I don't think you should restrict it. I mean, what you really want to do is you want to collect all your tax revenues in the least damaging fashion. All taxes are bad. Some are worse than others. That's why I like a low rate, broad-based flat tax bump. But you should collect all of your taxes in the most efficient, least damaging fashion possible, and spend the money in the most beneficial fashion possible. When the damage done by the last dollar of taxes collected is a less than the benefit done by the last dollar spent, you stop already. You should never try to match a tax with an expenditure. Never. Now, they've used these as excuses. We have gas taxes to fund highways. That's not a smart way of doing it. It just is not. The first highway you built can't be done on gas taxes. I used to joke with the president back in, I think it was 83, Lewis, Secretary Lewis of Transportation, wanted to raise the national gas tax to 5%, and Reagan agreed to it. And I was a little bit critical of the president, saying, and he said, "Arthur, this is not a tax, this is a user fee." And I said, "Will you explain to me how to do user free? I'm building a bridge." Ah, splash. Well, we can go another inch. I'm joking with you, but you should never match taxes with spending. Never. You should always collect your taxes in the least damaging fashion and spend the money in the most beneficial fashion. And if it happens to come out there the same, that's fine, but never require them to be the same. I hope that makes sense to you.
Thank you. Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Laffer. Dr. Laffer, I used to be a former county commissioner like many of us up here. Our county is growing leaps and bounds, Rutherford County, Murfreesboro, Smyrna. And I watched the county commission meeting the other night, and they're really worried about the cost of education. Our last school 2 years ago, it was projected cost was going to be $108 million. Now it's $150 million. Last night I do a radio show, and I had some homeschoolers on, and I've seen a study where 1 million students across the nation between 2021 and 2022 have left the public school system going into homeschooling. I have a theory that could save us some money and offer some relief, a relief valve to our county and counties across the state. My county, I think we're going to be in some desperate times, and there's some county officials here that may not want to nod their head at me. But what do you tell my county commissioners, Craig Harris, Pettis Reed, Anthony Johnson, Phil Wilson, and these others that are so concerned, because they'll go back and watch this? What would you tell my county commission as far as lowering cost, doing things more efficient? Because I really feel that we're in some deep trouble.
Not to get too deeply into this stuff, voucher systems is a very cost-effective way of saving money on schools. I mean,
Yes, sir.
it is, and I don't want to push it or not push it,
Yes, sir.
but it is. There are also merit pay for teachers, rewards for students for excellence. Those are great for supervisors, school supervisors. But the principle here, and I think this is the principle we all follow in our own personal lives, is you don't determine your income by what you want to spend. You determine what you want to spend by your income. You have a constraint placed upon you as to what the potential income can be, and then you live within your budget and work to spend it the most efficacious fashion possible. But those people who project spending and then saying we need to raise taxes are going to be very frustrated in their expectations of revenues. And I just beg you, and again, I'm not picking on it at all. In fact, it's really not bad in the nation. Is just look at Memphis area, and you can see exactly what the consequences are of basing your taxes on your spending rather than your spending on your taxes.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And if you look at Connecticut, I did a big thing on Connecticut, and you look at the major cities in Connecticut that are bankrupt. All of them are highest property tax cities in the whole state. Look at downtown Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor there. There are people who would pay you to take their building as long as you're reliable for the taxes. It's killed it. You cannot let spending drive your revenues. You just can't, or you'll be in a death spiral faster than you can snap your fingers.
Yeah, thank you. Chairman Zachary, I think you had a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Laffer, a couple of weeks ago, we were able to get the Uniform Commercial Code legislation that Governor Noem vetoed. That was here in Tennessee. We were able to get that stopped. The primary tenet of that was the establishment of the central bank digital currency and the change in the definition of the dollar. Could you just give us your thoughts and possibly even warnings related to what would happen in this country if a central bank digital currency was issued by the
Do you know
federal
how old I am?
I-
I'm 82 years old. I have no idea where digital currency. No, I'm just joking with you. I do know a little bit, but I don't know enough to give you a good answer. And please forgive me, but I have a funny line I use. Can I use this line here with you guys?
Please.
I'm not a lawyer. I think before I speak. And I'm just joking. with you. I don't mean it.
He called out
I'm
the law.
just joking.
No,
But I really don't know what the consequences of cryptocurrencies will be. I just don't. And I'm sorry I can't give you a good answer.
I will say, Chairman, that Dr. Laffer still has a flip phone, so I'm not sure he's.
I don't have a computer and I
yeah,
don't do
yeah.
emails either. So, I
So,
don't.
anyways, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may be setting you up here with a softball question.
love
As it
that.
relates to property taxes, we are experiencing some discussions and some members that are trying to get impact fees increased or established in their counties. Can you relate impact fees and their effect on local economies in a
Yeah.
similar way that we were talking about property taxes?
Yeah. What you want to do on your property tax limitation is make the legal wording such that the courts can later on, there'll be all sorts of things that will come up. Where is that really a circumvention of a property tax? That's an income pay. How about fees, fines, and assessments? As you may know, I mean, if we can go back to Ferguson, Missouri, when it was a city they're operating, I think had 80% of its revenues came from fees, fines, and assessments. You know, all these things trying to circumvent all sorts of ways around taxes. You need to make the wording of the legislation careful enough so that you don't just trigger someone substituting something else for it. With that having been said, there are reasons for fees, for fines, and for assessments. There are honest reasons for them. They're all not just circumvention. So you want to look at each one of those specifically, but I think that's where you look at the legislation, the courts to give you guidance above and beyond what you would put in the legislation itself, my view. There are going to be so many specific issues. Let me give you one in California. This drives everyone batty, and it drives me batty. 2 houses right next door to each other, built by the same day, same year. The one was sold last year at a very high price. This one's been owned for 30 years. It hasn't changed hands. And the one that hasn't changed hands, property taxes are 20% of the ones that was changed hands last year. That's not fair. I mean, it's really not. But you know, you can't have everything fair in the world. You do the best you can. Now, when this one changes hands, it will come up to the same basis. So you have a lot of those things you want looked at specifically and make sure that the courts or you guys in later legislation see those problems that have arisen and respond to them. It's a dynamic world we live in. I mean, I was down in Chile in the late 70s, and we got the best economic plan ever. Chile has grown faster than all the rest of Latin America by miles. Venezuela, the worst by far. And Chile just reverted back 3 years ago to the bad ways of the past and is now collapsing before our very eyes. You know, nothing lasts forever. And you guys have to be vigilant throughout the whole time period here to make sure you're overseeing the running of this state and making sure that things that slipped by you then don't occur and you can address them as you go along, always with the spirit of making Tennessee the best state in the nation.
Thank you, Dr. Laffer. That is all the questions we have today. I didn't want to try to land the ship for the original purpose that we came here today. And of course, you and I and several members from the Senate and the House are going to be spending a lot of time this summer having this discussion at great length, not just as legislators in this body, but also with local officials from across the state, having discussions about property tax and how or if any revisions are capping or those kinds of things. As you and I discussed, you know, a 1% increase in Clay County is a little bit different than a 1% increase in Williamson County. And so those kinds of discussions are going to be had with the purpose of trying to find a better way to continue to make Tennessee the best place in that we already are to relocate or start a business or grow a family. And so appreciate your testimony here today. Look forward to that discussion in the future. With that being said, we're going to go back into session. And any further comments before we conclude? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.